All right, moving into our second module, the basics of soil invertebrates. So to start off, I just want to give the information on how diverse these animals are. And invertebrate conservation is really a priority. We need all these animals. We'll talk about the different functions or ecological services they provide, which are essential in most terrestrial landscapes. And this is a hugely diverse group. There's over 2 million described species on Earth, and 70% of those are invertebrates, right? Over a million species. And the animal kingdom itself is 95% composed of invertebrates. So if you look at this pie chart here, you can see different invertebrates, invertebrate groups, and the giant section of the pie that's insects. So we're going to talk about insects and their invertebrate friends today. And when we take a deep dive a little later into those profiles, you'll learn a lot more about the diversity in different insect groups, how to find them, how to identify them, and what they do in our landscape. And the fate of the world's insects is really inseparable from our own. They provide so many services, contributing to soil health in many different ways. Ecological pest control, crop pollination. Here are a few examples: nutrient cycling and decomposition. Ants, as you see pictured here, and earthworms and other larger invertebrates are really good at being soil engineers. They're tunneling and digging through the soil. And so that helps with a lot of different things like pulling nutrients into the soil, decomposition of organic matter. We also have insects that are predators or parasitoids on pest populations. So like you see here, this parasitoid wasp parasitizing a caterpillar. You know, this creates balance in our ecosystem to suppress those pests so we don't have outbreaks where we have crop damage or damage to our plants. Insects themselves are food for other animals, so they're an important part of the food web. And of course, our pollinators help plants reproduce, producing those seeds and fruits and berries that not only humans eat, but that other wildlife rely on as well. Ooh, it looks like I'm missing a picture here. I apologize for that. And how can we connect with soil invertebrates? So when we talk about soil health, you know, a lot of the long-term soil science has focused on the physical and chemical properties of soils, which is also important, but we really want to bring some attention to these soil invertebrates. And so the many insects we see above ground spend part of their life in the soil. Things like fireflies, ground nesting bees, and some beetle species are a few examples. Here on the picture, you see a firefly larva. The picture that's missing was supposed to be a firefly adult. I'm not sure why that happened. So insects may spend their whole entire life cycle in the soil, but some of them spend part of their life cycle in the soil, either larva or pupa. And they do different functions sometimes as they switch to different life stages. Oh, there we go. And unfortunately, we are experiencing a global disappearance of insects. This is evident when we talk about pollinator decline, and I'm sure a lot of you people have, the people here attending have heard about that, you know, declines in bumblebees and monarch butterflies. But we're really experiencing a global disappearance of insects and invertebrates, which is alarming. So this study by Hallman et al. Shows that more than 75% a decline over 25 years in total flying insect biomass in protected areas. right? And so we're not just seeing this over a long period of time, we're seeing these insects disappear within a lifetime or less. And not just in highly disturbed landscapes, but also protected areas. And so it's unfortunate because we don't have enough protected areas to rely on to support this great diversity of insects and the functions that they provide. So we're also seeing 40% declines or 40% of invertebrate pollinator species may be at risk, with declines in over a quarter of our bumblebee species. Monarchs and other bees are experiencing similar declines. And so again, losing these functional roles is important to people, but we also want to think that about the just intrinsic value of nature and this biodiversity that we're trying to protect and conserve. Approximately a third of our tiger beetle species and subspecies in the US are sufficiently rare and can be considered threatened or endangered. And so tiger beetles are really fascinating predators, as you see here, beautiful beetles. I think Jennifer will talk more about these, but they're so interesting and just gorgeous insects. And they're really voracious predators as larvae and as adults. And one fun thing about them is that they're very fast. So you often see these insects, these tiger beetles, running along sandy open paths with a little sunlight. But they run in short spurts. So they'll run really fast and stop. And it's because they're running so fast, their eyesight can't keep up with them. This is just one other example of a soil invertebrate that is threatened or endangered as a group. So why are we looking at these? Well, it could be difficult. Soil invertebrates and soil-dwelling larvae stages of flying insects represent a major part of this biodiversity pool in terrestrial ecosystems, and they've been woefully neglected in many biodiversity databases and assessments. So a lot of these animals are understudied. We don't know a lot about some of their life cycles. We are still learning. There's a lot to learn, even to just basic taxonomy. Some of these insects are harder to identify. Some of them are very minute or microscopic. Others are, able to be observed by the naked human eye or with a hand lens. So we haven't had the conservation actions and policies in place to look at these animals. And so we're still learning more. But given that a major fraction of these invertebrates live below the ground under our feet, and considering their significant functional role, biodiversity monitoring is urgently needed. And we'll talk about that later today. And I think that's one of the fun parts, actually getting out there and looking at these animals and being curious and discovering, what's in the area you're looking at, whether it's your farm or a garden or a community garden. We want to know, right? We want to know what's out there. And I'm sure this is a review for a lot of you, but soil itself plays a really magnificent role in our life, right? We need it. It's essential. It's habitat for plants, microbes, and animals that we'll be talking about today. Helps with our water supply regulation and filtration. Recycling and storage of organic matter. Habitat for growing plants and crops. Construction. Soil provides us with a lot. And that's why it's critically important to consider soil health in your land management practices. So, soil, another review slide, is made of mineral particles of living and dead plants and animals. It has different structures and horizons that you could see here in this cross section on the first slide to the left. But soil material can be disturbed and removed and isolated, as you see here in this center picture, and becomes less alive. Those connections of all those animals, the roots, their interactions is disrupted, right? That makes sense. And then we have, just dirt and debris. That is not soil. So it's on a continuum, right? Soil health is on a continuum here. And we classify soil by different characteristics, right? The physical characteristics, the texture, the squeeze test, the aggregate stability and density, chemical, pH, cation exchange capacity, and fertility, biological characteristics like respiration, microbial diversity and abundance, and then other color, age, and orders. And so soil formation depends on 5 factors, right? Parent material, the organisms in the soil, climate, topography, and time. But if we really break this down, we really want to look at also human intervention, the human influence on soils, right? Because that is a huge factor that impacts soil formation. So soils formed under human influence can be anthrosols, technosols. In the first category, these are human-altered soils over hundreds and hundreds of years, long periods of time. These can be from agriculture. They're profoundly modified by intensive cultivation, irrigation, addition of organic wastes and other materials. These are anthropogenic soils, which include features. They're often thick. They have a fertile topsoil, if they're well maintained and cared for, of course, and are typical of agricultural lands. The next group here, technosols, are specialized soils. These are really heavily modified by construction, human activity, often containing a large proportion of manufactured artifacts, like concrete, bricks, industrial waste. We see this a lot in our urban farms and gardens and landscapes, right? Especially when we have an abandoned lot or something that has been converted into a community garden. We have to look at what was there before. There could be, all of this stuff buried in the soil, foundations, building materials, and things like that. So also, an important conservation concept. Sorry, I lost my train of thought there. When we're thinking about where we are in the landscape, right? But we do have soil invertebrates in urban soils, just like we would in land preserves or diverse large farm systems. Soil invertebrate communities can be diverse here too, right? And so just because you're working in that landscape does not mean you won't see these animals there, but it's good to know what they're sensitive to. And this can go for any landscape. These invertebrate communities are influenced by physical and chemical characteristics of the soil, as well as the past and present land use and management. So similar to other wildlife, other resources, the way we manage the land has an impact on these soil invertebrates and soil health. And they are sensitive to a wide range of things depending on the species. But some of the big heavy hitting factors are soil disturbance, right? Heavy metal contamination, pesticide use. A lot of our pesticides are highly toxic to a broad range of different insects, not just the pests they're being used for. And so, when you're eliminating those pests, you can also be impacting these beneficial populations. Irrigation, fertilization, the type of plant communities that are there. So to align with the soil health basics that we're all used to, these 4 soil health principles are also integral in conserving and protecting the soil invertebrates and soil life in general, all of the animals in the soil. So we want to define soil health as the continued capacity of a soil to function as a vital living ecosystem that sustains plants, animals, and humans. And we all know, protecting the soil by minimizing disturbance, maximizing soil cover, having some kind of vegetation year round. Permanent vegetation is a goal for a lot of these communities. But if you're in a cropping system, using crop rotation, planting cover crops is important as well. Also, having that refuge of permanent habitat nearby helps these animals. Feed the life in the soil. So maximize the amount of continuous living roots there and biodiversity. So, beyond this simple intuition of that, soil health is just the physical and chemical properties and the things we're used to looking at when we do soil testing or soil health assessments. We want to also consider, and our goal here today, hopefully, is to make you aware of the importance of these animals and how they fit into these soil health principles. Because it's really full of life. It is astounding what is going on under our feet. So this slide kind of takes us into our focus from the teeny tiniest microbes, bacteria and fungi, to meso and macro invertebrates, so those larger invertebrates, and of course, the plants and other animals, vertebrate animals that are there as well. So this is just a depiction of all of that diversity. About 25% of soil animals make up the diversity of all known living organisms. So that is really kind of hard to imagine. And another reason that makes studying these animals hard, right? There's a lot of them. It's hard to know everything about them. So here you could just see a little pyramid. A lot of times soil organisms are categorized by their size. So we have, these microscopic organisms, bacteria and fungi, nematodes. Then we get into mites and springtails, tiny small invertebrates, going up the pyramid to larger things like earthworms and spiders, and then snails and slugs, and then our vertebrates, right? And so we'll talk about a lot of these groups today with a little more focus on ones we could see, especially when we talk about sampling. So when we look at that bottom of that pyramid, fungi and bacteria, of course, are critical. Bacteria are the most abundant soil organism by biomass. They feed on carbon, contribute to decomposition, and are eaten by micro and mesofauna. So part of that food web again, the soil food web. They also transform atmospheric nitrogen to forms that are available to plants. So they make those nutrients bioavailable when they would otherwise be locked in the system. Fungi, again, very abundant, decompose plant residue, also regulate pathogens, and multiply the capacity of roots to absorb water, nutrients, and tolerate drought. So making these systems more resilient to extreme conditions that we are experiencing in our climate. Okay. And my favorite part that I like to talk about are what are the ecological roles of these soil animals. And so we'll start here with influencing microbes. They disperse microbes throughout the soil layer, make nutrients more accessible to those microbes, and alter those communities through predation. So that interaction is really important. Invertebrate functional diversity can lead to increased microbial diversity. And this is really important. Soil invertebrates can also influence microbial communities by moving soil, these soil engineers, like I said before, mixing the nutrients within the soil. And this is what's contributing to soil formation and good organic matter. Decomposition. A lot of these animals play a really important role in breaking down plant and animal matter into pieces bacteria and fungi can use. They break that down into smaller particles, and it creates more niches for pores for bacteria to occupy as they move and tunnel through the soil. So things like earthworms and ants and termites are really important soil engineers. And for example, the population of bacteria increases significantly on matter after it passes through a soil animal. So even their behavior of eating is important here, right? Not to mention the animals that break down other animals and dung and things like that. Very important, again, for bringing down that plant and animal matter and mixing it into the soil, but also removing things like pathogens from the landscape that could impact other animals or humans. Be a very different world if we didn't have things like dung beetles around to help us with that. Enriching the soil, they integrate those nutrients. So the animals that are burrowing or tunneling mix those nutrients and minerals between soil layers, influencing soil structure, fertility, infiltration, water holding capacity. And again, the soil engineers, tunneling into soil, bringing subsoil to the surface, helping to hydrate and aerate the soil, as you can see here. They create channels for plant roots as well, which prefer to grow through areas of least resistance, right? So that tunneling behavior makes those spaces for plant roots to expand. And then, as I mentioned earlier, this is just a depiction of the ecological roles of soil animals in food webs. So there's herbivores, fungivores, bacteriivores, predators, parasitoids, and pollinators all using the soil during all or part of their life cycle, depending on the group of insect. And at the bottom of the food chain, they help support plants and animals all the way up to predators and parasitoids up here. So they're really helpful in supporting just the diversity of other wildlife, including vertebrate wildlife. I just love this depiction of all of these animals doing their different functional roles. And again, you know, soil is full of life. All of these interactions, the connections they're making are critical for maintaining functional, healthy soils. So soil animals do a lot. They have a huge influence on life above ground that we cannot live without. Just to summarize, cycling those nutrients, building soil structure, improving infiltration and water storage, plant productivity, regulating climate, balancing populations of other organisms through things like predation, like we mentioned, pollination. A lot of our, and you'll learn more about this later, a lot of our bees nest in the ground, right? So their developing larvae are underground. We think of them as flying animals that visit flowers, but they really do spend a lot of their life below our feet. and food resources for other wildlife. So when we think and reflect back on the slide about soil health principles, we also need to know, what are those disturbances doing if we are mismanaging our soils? So some things we want to do when we think about soil health practices, whether it's in a yard, garden, urban farm, large rural farm, limiting that physical soil disturbance. So that can be reducing tillage, rotating tilled areas, keeping that soil covered, of course, limiting chemical disturbances. These non-pest, these beneficial species that we're talking about take much longer to recover from pesticide exposure than do pests. Pests are good at being pests because they build up their populations very quickly. In many cases, they have multiple generations per year. And so, they're able to recover from a disturbance before or quicker than our beneficial insects do. A lot of those insects don't have as many generations. They take longer to develop. Killing off the predators and parasitoids not only lead to pest outbreaks, but they can lead to secondary pest outbreaks, right? And so creating a whole new pest problem. And secondary outbreaks can lead to more damage than primary pests. Examples include spider mites and slug, which can be kept in check with beneficial insect populations. Okay. Reducing risk to non-target invertebrates. The way we go about that is using an integrated pest management program, starting with prevention, right? Using those cultural practices that prevent pest outbreaks, such as pest exclusion, floating row covers like you see in this top, physical barriers so that pests cannot get to that plant. Crop rotation, of course, we all know, breaking those pest cycles in the soil is really important for a lot of crops. So rotating crops, avoidance techniques, using resistant varieties, and then trapping and monitoring, right? We only want to have to use extreme interventions when they're needed. So one of the things we are trying to eliminate is unnecessary pesticide applications. And we want to look for the safest pest control measures. So ones that have the least impact on beneficial insects. And then maximizing cover. This should be, I hope, pretty familiar to everybody, keeping the soil covered with living cover. So planting cover crops on your farm or even in garden beds to help build soil organic matter, help keep weeds at bay, suppress weeds, hold and protect the soil, from erosion, wind, soil, and rain, provide habitat provide habitat for soil animals, pollinators, and more, right? And then using organic mulches to conserve water and suppress weeds can be another option under inert cover, and allowing some crop residues to remain on the field to decompose, right? Which also provides other benefits like cover for these animals, cover for the soil, nutrients for the soil. We also want to maximize continuous living roots throughout the year. So reducing fallow periods, whether it's a garden bed or a crop field. Grow long season crops when possible, successional crop planting, plant cover crops, and grow areas of perennial vegetation. And then maximizing biodiversity, growing as many different plant species as possible. So if you rotate crops, if you have successional crop rotation, that is wonderful. We also want to prioritize diverse permanent habitat with native plants. That helps give these animals refuge, areas to escape to that are free of disturbance, free of pesticides. So if we're planting perennial or permanent habitat for beneficial insects, we really want to have that protected from pesticide exposure. And all of this, helps support soil life, pollinators, and more, and helps reduce exposure that leads to contamination in the soil. One example of that is hedgerows, rows of shrubs or large wildflowers that provide resources for pollinators in urban landscapes. These could be on rural landscapes as well. But having these areas of permanent diverse vegetation, different types of plant material. So you have herbaceous plants, woody plants, creating these different niches for things that are living under the ground. Also things that emerge and need to feed on things like pollen and nectar, such as pollinators, some fireflies, other animals that switch their diets or supplement their diets throughout their life cycle. Another way to do this would be to plant strips of permanent grasses called beetle banks, which also provides kind of a beneficial microclimate for those animals.